Our scripture reading this morning is from John 15, verses 1 through 17. And it's from the New Revised Standard Version Updated Edition. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes to make it bear more fruit. You have already been cleansed by the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing. Whoever does not abide in me is thrown away like a branch and withers. Such branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask for whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I keep my Father's commandments and abide in his love. I have said these things to you so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. I do not call you servants any longer, because the servant does not know what the master is doing. But I have called you friends, because I have made known to you everything that I have heard from my Father. You do not choose me, I chose you. I appointed you to go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, so that the Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. I am giving you these commands so that you may love one another. Here ends the reading.
Good morning again. Can we thank our praise band one more time? They had to be here at 7:30 a.m. because I was teaching adult Sunday school and I can't be in two places at once, as Kent pointed out to me on Tuesday, and I hadn't even realized. So thank you guys for showing up so early to practice. Well, good morning again. We're continuing a series called The Symbols of Our Sanctuary. What do all of these objects that are scattered about, what do they mean? Why are they here? Why are they important? And how could they shape our living for every day? And this morning's symbol is unique in that it's the only one of its kind in our sanctuary, yet it points to the very center of the Christian faith. It's what we all hang our hat on, and of course, that is Jesus. Jesus represented here in our sanctuary by an abbreviation, not an acronym, not some kind of magic potion, an abbreviation, IHS. You see it here and here and here and there. IHS, which is the first three letters of Jesus' name. So as we look at this text and we hold what's called it's called a Christogram. It's kind of like an Instagram, but a Christogram. It's like a snapshot, but it tells 1,000 words, right? So we look at this Christogram in our text. Would you pray with me? Holy God, if there's one person, one being, one set of teachings, one life, one death, one resurrection that you call us to, this is the one. By some mystery that we may never fully understand, it's this person you've called us to make the heart and life and center of all of our being and all of our doing. So help us by your Spirit through this text and through this ancient symbol to dive deeper into that calling this morning, that it's just Jesus. Amen. One of the most interesting and difficult challenges that we face as a church, and we always seem to be facing this question as of late, we faced it at our presbytery meeting just on Friday and Saturday, is what are we doing here? What are we doing here? What is the church? What is this supposed to be about? And unfortunately, what we tend to do with this question is we stray into all these ambiguities, all these complexities, all these smaller minutiae and nuances of the scriptures. We turn to the stress patterns of church finances. We love to do that. We turn to the latest statistics and strategies and models for church growth. We think that's what we're doing here. What are we doing here? We're stressing about money and we're figuring out how to grow. So it's often, to my thinking, this is answered, what are we doing here? And this avoidance. It's what I like to call over-complexification. And I know I just made that word up, but I think it's true. We over-complexify everything. Not just our faith, but everything. And it helps us, in this case, what it helps us to do is to just not have to deal with the realities of Jesus. The simple command that we heard this morning, abide in me. Abide in me as I abide in you. Love one another. To which this symbol, which means Jesus, and it only means Jesus, we put all these over-complexifications on it. We say, oh, it's an acronym, it means this and that and the other, blah, blah, blah. It means Jesus, that's all it means. This symbol is meant to point us to that simplicity every single week. In this morning's text, Jesus gives kind of a little instruction booklet for this is the Christian life. This is what it looks like. And so it's so simple, we might even, I hope, walk away and go, okay, I think I might be able to do that. It's going to be hard to do, but it's not going to be complicated. You've heard me say that before. It's just IHS. It's just Jesus. In fact, these letters, as I said, they're an abbreviation. They're the first 3 letters of Jesus' name. And it's even as though this symbol that we see every single week, it's trying to get us to just further narrow in and center in on Jesus. It's just Jesus. Just keep your eye on the ball. It's in the center of the cross, both of them. So we read Jesus saying, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit, and every branch that bears fruit, he prunes to make more fruit. This is, in John's gospel, this is Jesus' final I am statement. He said, I am the light, and I am the shepherd, and I am the bread. Now this is the last one that he says, I am the vine. Jesus is the vine. Jesus is the root. Jesus is the trunk of the tree. Jesus is the method. Jesus is the message that God is using. God, who in this metaphor has an eye on and an ear for and hands for this whole plan, God who sees this world as an agricultural expert sees a garden. And so Jesus says, I am the connection. As this God who's got this overarching plan is busy cutting back and pruning and planting and picking. And we read when the branch is dead, God removes it. And when the branch bears fruit, God prunes it. In the Greek, it reads, God cuts off or God cuts back. Either way, there is cutting. Notice, though, first of all, God cuts off branches that are already dead. Branches that have maybe or maybe not been connected to the vine, but they are clearly they're making their own choices as branches here to be cut off from the nourishment that the vine provides. So it's not, as we often think, as we tend to over-complexify things, it's not that God's wrath comes in and just kills in fiery judgment all these bad branches. No, the branches are already dead. It's a matter of personal choices and a direction that these branches have taken. They're dead way before God cuts them off or cuts them away. And then for those who bear fruit, we read, we are cut back. It doesn't sound very nice. We all get cut in this process, but it's a practice that those who work with plants, they know. This promotes the health and the vitality of the plant, to prune it. So pruning, cutting back, is as counterintuitive as that seems, it works We know that it works, and it promotes the health of the plant. So somehow, what I'm reading here is that as we get smaller, that's where God has room to help us grow into something bigger. As we get smaller, IHS, just Jesus, that's where God can have room to make us into something bigger. Jesus then goes on to say, I am the vine and you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me, you can't do anything. What Jesus is saying here is those who make their home in him, they're branches that take up residence in Jesus, they're going to bear a lot of fruit. And without Jesus, you can't really do much of anything at all. So apart from Jesus, Jesus says, you can't do anything. And we read that and we go, well, that's not exactly true. I do all sorts of things without Jesus. But Jesus here says, well, no, you do nothing apart from me. We go, what does he mean by that? Well, what Jesus is trying to do here is trying to give the church, he's trying to give us an idea of what counts for something and what counts for nothing. What he's saying to us is that all the stuff you do apart from Jesus, it's unimportant. It's a zero-sum game. It's a rat race. And it's the stuff that just gets burned off. It's just waste in the end. There's fruitful growth in quality of life when we're with Jesus, and then there's really not any kind of growth without Jesus. Jesus keeps going. He says in verse 7, if you abide in me and my words abide in you, that is what he teaches abides in you, ask for whatever you wish and it will be given to you. Now I read that and I go, that sounds like wish fulfillment. That sounds really nice. But he means something a little different than that. Everything about living a life as a branch is connected to the vine, and so it hinges on Jesus' words, just like it says in the text. So what he's saying here is that even your askings are going to be informed by my teachings, by my words. So when we're soaking in Jesus' teachings, when we're absorbing the nourishment of Jesus' teachings, we begin asking things that are inherently going to give God glory, as it says then in verse 8, and that are rooted and established in God's love, as it says in verse 9, and are part and parcel to God's plan, as it says in verse 10. When we're branches making our home, when we're nestled into the vine, we're doing and being exactly what we're meant to be doing and being, and it even affects what we're going to ask for. Which is why Jesus can say, yeah, you can ask for that and it will be done for you. And then verse 11 assures us that when we're branches making our home in the vine, when we're doing and being and asking as branches grafted into the vine, that it brings great joy to our lives. You see, it's simple. It's just IHS. It's just Jesus. But the very way we're wired is to be connected to God and to each other, all of this rooted in love, and that connection, it brings glory and joy to God, and God's glory is a source of joy for us. It's not complicated. It's just Jesus. It's just IHS. And then in the context of that joy, Jesus goes on in verses 12 through 14. He says, this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. Jesus makes it clear that true love has this real, tough, tangible piece to it. Sacrificial piece to it. It almost actually sounds like pruning. There's a cutting piece to this kind of love. Friends, true friends, go the distance for their friends, and there's sacrifice there. And Jesus says, you are my friends, and if you do what I command you, you are my friends. And then the invitation starts to get even better. He says, because I no longer call you servants. Because the servant doesn't know what the master is doing. But I've called you friends because I have made known to you everything that I have heard from my Father. Everything I know, you know. So I take that to mean that we're not in the dark about God's plans for this world, even though the church is often saying we're so in the dark about what are God's plans for this world. You see, what happens is we over-complexify everything. And when we do this, we're actually taking shared common knowledge as people dwelling in and abiding in the vine, and we're making it way more complicated than it really is. We're making it into something ambiguous. We're making it into something that is out of reach. We're making it inaccessible to those who aren't rich or those who don't have it all together or those who aren't smart enough or whatever enough. So then you ask, well, what's the plan then? If we all know it, what's the plan? What is God up to? Well, God is a gardener who planted a vine, and the vine grows branches, and the branches bear fruit. How? By branches making their home in the vine, and that vine's forever connection to the gardener, and the gardener's great love of the garden. It's no more complex than growing a plant. How do we know? How do we know that this is the case? Jesus says it's pretty simple. You know through your love for one another. It's very clear. It's very simple. It's not easy. It's not easy to love one another. You ever notice that? It's not easy to do, but it's not complicated. It's just this center. It's just this IHS. It's just Jesus. I remember about 3 years into ministry, I went to a pastor's convention. I was a youth pastor at the time, and I went to a pastor's convention. And in 2 years' time and being in ministry, I went from like all the highs you have when you complete seminary and you're getting ordained and all these kinds of things, being commissioned to serve this church that was wonderful. And then I went very quickly into these disastrous lows. I started to question my call. I started to question the church's purpose and reason for being. I wondered many times, I went home many days wondering, should I just quit? And I wondered also, this was even harder to wonder, but I wondered, should the church just quit? It was just an awful experience, these first 3-4 years I spent in ministry. And I spent countless hours ruminating and cogitating, and I would deliberate in my mind. I was driving my wife, Kristen, I was driving her absolutely nuts. I couldn't talk about anything else but the problems with the church. And I was in a church world at that time that it was so complex and it was so fuzzy and it was so full of ambiguities that I didn't quite understand. There were these power plays happening. There was these fiefdoms. There was all this politicking going on. And truthfully, what happened to me is that rather than sticking to my roots and to my identity in Jesus, abiding in the vine, what happened to me is I got caught up in what I call all this dead branch thinking. I got caught up in the dead branches. So anyways, I went to this pastor's convention. I listened to this incredibly powerful speaker. I've not really heard a speaker quite this powerful before or since. His name was Bishop Rushahana, and his ministry was the Rwanda Prison Fellowship. And I know that some of us are familiar with the history of Rwanda, and he's right in the middle of that. And I listened to Bishop Rushahana speak with great force and just extreme clarity about the work of reconciliation in the prison system there in Rwanda, where former enemies, blood enemies, violent enemies, Hutus and Tutsis, they regularly interfaced and interacted with each other in these prisons. And where he himself, he never knew if the person he was caring for or giving counsel to had been the very person who had brutally raped and murdered his niece. And he spoke with such power, and he kept saying this phrase. He kept saying, the real power of Jesus. The real power of Jesus. And he kept on saying this. He kept on saying, it's not magic. The reconciliation happening in Rwanda, happening in Africa, it's not magic. It's the real power of being rooted in Jesus. Well, I hear this guy, and it's so powerful, and I'm in such a low spot in my life, and I'm like, I have to talk to this guy face to face. And I have to seek guidance from him, and I have to tell him my story and ask him, what do you think I should do? Should I quit my position at the church? Should I find another position in another church? Was my call to ministry somehow just a farce? Should I apply at the Home Depot? And so I signed up for a 30-minute interface with Bishop Rushahani. You were able to do this at the conference if you got there in time. And I sat there with him, and I laid it all out there for him. And I said with tears in my eyes, I have no idea what I'm supposed to be doing. I have no idea what the church is supposed to be doing. And I'm so confused, and I'm so depressed and despairing, and I'm finding it impossible and exhausting to navigate all the complexities of God's church. And I don't know that I'm cut out for something so complex. Bishop, should I quit? McDonald's is looking pretty good right now. Should I go back to school? Should I be a professor? I once felt I should have been that. And I don't think I had ever confused a person or misread the gravity of differing situations and circumstance more than I had confused and misunderstood the gravity of the difference between Bishop Rushahana's life and my life than I did that day. He looked at me so puzzled, beyond belief, and said to me with his eyes, "What is this rich white boy so upset about?" But he could tell, and I think he felt bad for me. And so he calmly resolved to just ask me some questions, very simple questions. He asked, "Did Jesus call you to ministry?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Are you serving Jesus with your life?" I said, "Yes, I'm trying to." I said, "Do you pray to Jesus for help?" I said, "I'm praying all the time to Jesus for help." He says, "Is Jesus your boss, your Lord? Is Jesus your shepherd? Is Jesus your teacher?" I said, "Yes, yes, yes." And he said, "Then what's all this concern about calling? Or to this job or that job? Or this church or that church? What are you talking about? You're doing Jesus' calling on your life when you serve him and when you love your neighbor and when you work for the reconciliation of this world. When you live for him and when you pray to him." And he said, and he was much older than me and I was much younger at the time, he said, "Young man, it is not so complicated." Jesus says to us this morning in John's gospel, "You did not choose me, I chose you. And I appointed you to go bear fruit, fruit that will last, so that the Father will give you whatever you ask in my name. And I am giving you these commands so that you may love one another." Jesus chooses us, asks us to live in him just as he lives in us, appoints us for fruit bearing, gives us uninterrupted access to the Father, gives us his friendship, and commands us that we love one another. This symbol here in our sanctuary, this abbreviation that just means Jesus, it sits here as a reminder every Sunday. It's just Jesus. But to close with a couple of thoughts, I think our minds, because we love to over-complexify things, immediately jump to this fruit-bearing piece. What's that? And you notice in the text, Jesus never once really enumerates or explains what the fruit-bearing is, or so we imagine, or our over-complicated minds imagine. And it appears in the text that fruit-bearing is tremendously important business, because if you're not doing it, you stand the chance of getting, not pruned, but cut off altogether. And it seems to me a little unfair that Jesus would not tell us exactly what it means to bear fruit then. What does that mean? So that we can measure it, right? Because that's what we want to do. We want to measure the fruit. And so we can track the fruit, right? We want to track the fruit, just like track attendance. For a lot of us who are in ministry, a lot of the folks that I gathered with the last couple of days, fruit bearing has always meant one of two things. I bet you can even guess what they are. Because they're concrete and we can measure them. But in fact, they're concrete and we can measure them, but they hardly ever tell us anything. We want them to tell us things. They don't really tell us much of what we want to know. They're measurable, so you can count them, but we never know what they actually mean. And mostly because we have no real idea of how to control or cajole or manage or call these things into being. And these fruits that we talk about in ministry often, too often, are numbers of people and numbers of dollars. That's the fruit that Jesus is talking about. Numbers of people and numbers of dollars. Now, did you hear Jesus mention anything in the text about numbers of people or numbers of dollars? No. But when we don't have numbers of people or numbers of dollars, don't we usually then lay up all this guilt on ourselves and we question our call as Christians or as the church or as its leaders? And don't we think things like, well, we might need to reconfigure our staffing structure or our leadership structure. If the numbers be the fruit, then more often than not, we're in a whole lot of trouble as fruit bearers. If the numbers be the fruit, then we go to all sorts of lengths and all sorts of excess and all sorts of measures to get those numbers, even if those lengths and those excesses contradict and overshadow everything Jesus taught us. So I want to suggest to you this morning that line of thinking, it's an egregious error. We've actually looked at Jesus' simple words once again, and we just overcomplexified them. We're so good at it. The life of the church is not complicated. Mike, it's not complicated. It's simple. Mike and I were talking about this morning. Make your home in Jesus and love one another. The fruit that Jesus is speaking of, he absolutely does address it in the text. The fruit is the love. And it's nothing more, but it's nothing less. It's the love. And it's not easy to love one another, but it's not complicated. So sometimes we don't need to do all of the things that we're doing. Sometimes we don't need to be over-complexifying everything in our lives. Sometimes we need to take these symbols to heart. IHS. It's just Jesus. All the time. It's that simple. And all God's people said,